Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be discussing culture, one-sidedness, personality typology, integration, self-growth, a lot of that stuff. And it's going to be a little bit unfiltered. So bear with me. It's been a bit since I've made YouTube videos. And so I'm kind of getting back in the hang of letting things flow. But basically, this was inspired based on some conversation that was happening in my Facebook group, Personality Typology for Self-Growth. So if you're interested in that, if you're not already in that group, I'll link that below. But basically, unless you're living under a rock, politics have been very contentious lately. I mean, I'm filming this the day before the presidential election in 2020 in America. I know in my Facebook group, it's a pretty international audience, and people who watch my videos are international as well. And this conversation about personality type and self-growth is happening all over the world. So when we're talking about self-growth and using type as a tool to get there, culture is a big factor that I feel like often goes overlooked in the type community. Now, if you read like current like typology researchers and writers, there seems to be a theme where most people, I mean, I believe it's a consensus amongst people who do this professionally that obviously there are other factors that influence your personality other than just your type. And I believe that it's our duty or responsibility as people learning about personality type to understand what those factors are so that when we're trying to understand type, we can kind of look through those factors, if that makes sense. So I've made a video before about gender and about how men and women might test differently due to the way that they're socialized. A thinker woman might be more likely to feel like they have to develop their feeling based on social pressure, and they might test more 50-50 thinker and feeler. Or a feeler man might feel deeply ashamed of being a feeler in this world where they're supposed to be super macho and, repress their feelings depending on what kind of family they grew up in and what their culture is. So I've talked about this before. And in the past, I've been afraid to, start conflict or like mention anything that would create conflict. And, as an ENFJ myself, I'm very much swimming in these emotional waters, especially with everything going on collectively right now. But I think that we would be remiss to not talk about culture at all in the conversation of self-growth and type. And also, my fear of starting conflict by mentioning something that was happening in culture was also remiss. And I can explain that as well. But basically, so let's just start out with, what even is self-growth? And how are we using personality type as a tool to do that? So self-growth at a very basic level is giving your ego more awareness. It is becoming aware. And when you say becoming aware, it's like, what is becoming aware of what? The moment you become aware, there's like this division that happens within you where you're no longer just running on autopilot. You're not just sleepwalking. Your mind is not filled by just the dogma and doctrine, your cultural norms, your type as a code. You're not just running on autopilot. You are aware of yourself, which creates a division, which creates two. So that's when growth occurs. Because if you're not aware of yourself, then you're not fully in control of yourself. And the moment you're aware of yourself, your perception divides in two, and who is aware of who, that's kind of your perspective. Some people think that they're like an ego that is becoming aware of the soul, or maybe you're a soul becoming aware of oneness, of God, of everything. Maybe you are just an ego becoming aware of the ego. I think that the way I would answer that is that I am really starting to see the ego as this window of perception that is like the vehicle for growth, where every human has a soul and a body and a mind and a heart and all of that. But our ego is almost like this, the ego is attached to the body, and there's spiritual energy within it, and the ego is what is aware of the body and the spirit and the mind and the body and the heart. I might have said some of those things twice, but the ego, we talk about it as a super scary thing where, oh, the ego is against my growth, or like that person has a really big ego. But I think that the people that we refer to as having super big egos are actually just the people with super unaware, small-minded egos. Because if your ego is super unaware and small-minded, then that is going to be a super stubborn person that is fighting against the whole rest of the psyche and everything else. So when your ego becomes aware of the rest of the self, or like other parts of the psyche, that process is almost like feeding more awareness into, it's like funneling more awareness into your main identity or understanding of yourself. And for many of us, when we first learn type, that is one way of the ego to become aware of itself. Because before, you might have been just unaware of how you make decisions, unaware of how you perceive the world. And so knowing type could be a way that your ego knows now, oh, okay, so it seems as though I'm making a lot of decisions based on feeling and based on intuition. And so the process of awareness after that, like for me as an ENFJ, has been, if I want to feed more awareness into that ego so that it can expand with more light and with more wisdom and knowledge, it must become aware of other things, like your inferior function. I'm not saying that you need to grow and suddenly become another type. I'm saying if you're an FE Dom like me, becoming aware of the fact that you do indeed have inferior introverted thinking. I'm not saying change it, I'm saying be aware. Like this first step is just being aware. And when you are aware, you have more insight. So you then change, because what tends to happen is with more awareness creates this chemical reaction between things. So in personality typology, we've got feeling and thinking, we've got sensing and intuition. These are two polarities that we're working with. And growth is alchemizing those polarities. Growth is whenever these polarities begin to speak with one another. And the reason why this is all connected here is because when we're talking about culture, or where we're having discussions where there's hot button topics involved, there's people from different countries, different political views, different religious beliefs, when in different types, when we have people from all over connecting, if you are different from somebody else, you just by existing might be, influencing their ego to then become aware of you and what your ego is aware of. Now, I'm not sure if ego is the best term for that. It's the term that fits the best for me, but I don't really like all of the negative connotations associated with it. So I might clarify that more later. But the thing is this self-growth process, it does have to do with you becoming aware of yourself so that there's less tension within the self. And the thing is that growth and transformation requires tension. So a lot of people mistake tension as like some sort of conflict when like there already exists tension within you the moment that you become aware. The moment that you become aware, the one is split into two. There becomes an aware self watching the rest of the self. And it's like, that is what creates, there's this subconscious and this not self that is beneath. And you're, how do I want to explain this? So in a lot of like spiritual communities, self-growth communities, people talk a lot about resistance and how resistance might be something that you feel internally that might prevent you from acting on something. And I guess what I want to talk about when it comes to self-transformation and cultural transformation, which I'll talk about at the end of this video, is that it is about acknowledging and understanding the resistance that you feel, but not shying away from it, instead of shining a light on it so that this chemical reaction that we like to call growth can occur. Because if we shy away from the resistance because we believe that it is what is causing the conflict, then we cannot fulfill this chemical reaction of growth where the ego becomes aware of more stuff. And just as this happens internally, it also happens with others. So I'll go back to explaining that in a second, but when it relates to culture and other people, on my Facebook group, I've noticed I've had this group for, I think, almost 3 years now, at least 2.5. Different people of different types can get into little arguments where both sides are completely talking about something that is completely different. Like there's just no wires crossing whatsoever. And it can be frustrating at times, especially if you're someone who does understand type and you could see where the wires are being crossed. Like you can notice how someone is pointing right at the SE and someone is talking about something else. So I'm trying to think if I have an example. Like, So this is a crystal that I have. You might say, like, there might be an intuitive versus sensing argument about this, where sensing says that's just a shape or something, and intuitive says, no, actually, this symbol means X, Y, and Z, whatever it means to them. That's kind of a silly example. I'm trying to think of an example of how this can occur, but you get the idea, is that it's like reality is here, and then you have two different functions projecting themselves onto it, and they're unable to see the other. And that's where awareness comes in. And that's where transformation comes in, is that you must be aware of the other in order to transform yourself and in order to transform the community. The sensor must be aware of the intuition. The intuitor must be aware of the sensor. But I'm not saying that the sensor needs to grow their intuitive function and get more intuitive. I'm saying that the sensor must be aware of intuition. And so what does that mean? If you're a sensor, that might just be allowing yourself the time and space to perceive of your own intuition, or at least go about the world and knowing that there's a whole other like breed of human that is reacting to this intuitive sphere constantly, whether or not you see it or not. So that's the first step, is just being aware of the fact that this thing even exists. And you can't grow your function without this step, but people tend to miss it because they get frustrated, because the thing is that our lower down functions are a lot slower at processing. So for example, as an ENFJ, I have been interested in how people work basically as long as I remember, but I have been frustrated. Like, it takes me longer to let a concept sink in with my inferior TI. It can take longer for things to click enough to where I feel comfortable explaining, or to where I feel like I can go head to head in an argument, because my sense of knowing and my sense of understanding doesn't fully come from my introverted thinking function. That is something that it had to start with me just at least being aware that it existed. And it would be like, what kind of principles are beneath what I'm saying? What could be an argument that can prove what I'm saying? So my interest in understanding people had to inspire me to grow an awareness of what my TI like already thought and what it could think. And, with SE and TI, I have been consuming what other people who think similarly to me think, and what people who don't think similarly to me think, so that I can reflect based off of them and see what I think. So it's not, if I were to pressure myself to suddenly be like an INTP or ISTP, I would have become very frustrated with myself, because I would be essentially expecting myself to use a tool that I'm unaware of. And by nature of becoming aware of the other side, or the other tools in your toolbox, that's when transformation happens, because whenever your ego is aware of both, then naturally both transform, because when they're both aware of the other, they cannot operate in such a one-sided way to where, so this is another thing, is that a lot of people, when they're first learning about personality type, they might notice that feeling operates in this way, thinking operates in this way. And they might see, well, most feelers that I know would react like this, X, Y, and Z. And most thinkers that I know tend to react like this, X, Y, and Z. But the thing is that a lot of these telltale signs for typing people are related to these sort of shadow reactions that pop up, in the sense of like, oh, a feeler might become emotional at something like this because because I just did a thinking thing. Like we know that feeling and thinking, they can kind of fight at each other, because when they're directly opposed, and when both sides are unable or unwilling to be aware of the other, then both sides feel attacked, and both sides then attack in order to inspire that transformation. And if we are afraid of that conflict of both sides coming at each other, it's like, really, these conflicts are both functions wanting to make themselves known. If a feeler doesn't feel like their feelings are being seen, then they're going to react to inspire them to be seen. And if thinking feels like thinking is not seen, then thinking is going to try and be seen. And this causes conflict. So how do we solve that? It's being aware, seeing both. Because I guess what I was going to say earlier is that if we can't define, when we define a function based on these behaviors that it might do, then those are just symptoms of what we might associate with a reaction that might happen whenever the inferior or another side comes in. But whenever you choose to surrender and you let yourself be aware, you don't have to be aware of all 8 functions all at once, and you're not going to just become a superhuman, because you are centered at your starting point. But it is the state of allowing that is allowing other functions to exist. I've noticed that the less internal tension that I have with my own TI, then the easier it is for me to get along with other, like with TPs. I've noticed that it's been very evident is that if I can stand confident or can accept my TI for what my TI is at this point in time, then it in turn could make TPs feel more accepted for me, and not feel like I'm judging them. Because, so going with the FJ and TP example, like if I'm unaware of my TI, then that means I'm unaware of my personal judgments, which means that other people might be reacting to what they perceive is my judgment against them, that I might not even be aware of. And I might even be having a judgment against thinking itself. And if a TP notices or perceives that I have a judgment against thinking itself because I judge my own thinking, then they then feel judged by me, whether or not I intended for them to feel judged, because I chose to not see them. And so really, transformation and self-growth is all about being willing to see. And when it comes to groups, it is about also being willing to see the other. And that is what reduces and diminishes conflict, is when we can see the other. So the reason I even bring up politics and culture is because I just wanted to point out that this process of transformation and self-growth, where you are becoming aware and then the two dualities become aware of each other, which creates change. It's basically like any pole that you can find, any duality that you can find in the world. You might have one that you prefer or that you have as a starting point. But if you can choose to become aware of the opposite, then that awareness within itself, it's from 2 becomes 3. 3 is like a magic number. That is what shifts you into a new integrated way of seeing said thing. You can do this with type, but you can do this with anything. And I just want to throw that out there for you guys to think about. If you have any ideas of what other things could work with this, let me know. But obviously what comes to mind is political arguments, religious arguments, philosophical arguments. Choosing to see can solve so much inner tension. Being willing to see the other side, even if it's triggering you, and also not blocking it out. Like if something is a real fear or a real concern, then allow yourself to see why that is a concern. If something is a real desire, why is that a real desire? And the thing is I'm not trying to do the fallacy of, what is it called? Like false equivalence. I'm not trying to say that both sides are equal. And I'm not trying to say that you just have to love and accept and that's going to solve everything. But the solutions that come through are ones that are aware of the needs of all, or else there will still be this divisiveness. The reason why everything is so divisive right now is because sides are refusing to see. And part of that, I think, is a good thing, because I believe that there have been certain like minority groups or certain emotions that have not been heard. And now they are demanding to be heard. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think that that means that finally, when we move forward from whatever happens, it will involve those emotions being heard, because they're speaking them louder. And I say they, but this could apply to many, many different things. This could have to do with like class. This could have to do with religion, gender, whatever. People are allowing their voices to be heard. And part of that is because with the internet, we're able to find our people, and we feel not as alone in those emotions. And it does cause a lot of radical, it can cause radicalization. But these deep-rooted shadows in the global psyche they're demanding to be seen. And people who are speaking on behalf of these wounds are demanding for them to be seen. So how do we navigate that? And I don't have the perfect answer. Like, this is going to be very, very tricky. But just as the one-sidedness is happening within you, within your own functions, it's happening outside of us. And in order to be the sort of person who can navigate everything that's happening outside of us, it really helps to feel as though you've opened up to awareness of your own divisiveness, and being willing to see the polarity within you will make it a lot easier to engage with the polarities in the collective. And it'll help it be easier to navigate, so that you can see solutions that will be the win-win-win three, as in a win for you, a win for this side, and then a win for all. It's not just who's the strongest, who's the best. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not, because that lacks awareness. And when it lacks awareness, then if the other side, then it just gives more fuel to that side to want to come and attack you, to make it known. So, for example, if you were a thinker, you might not want to be aware of a feeling such as grief, because you might find it unuseful. And so you might not feel that grief, or try and ignore it. And the more you try and ignore it, the more that grief will bubble up and basically punch you in the face and force you to witness it. And the same thing happens with a feeler who is ignoring a judgment that they might have against their family or their partner. They don't want to be rude. They don't want to criticize. And so they might feel this like sort of angry, bitter thought come up that doesn't feel like their own. It feels like an intruder. And just witnessing it and accepting, yeah, I'm a person with thoughts. That in itself could be healing for a feeler. So I guess like the goal here, in my opinion, and what a lot of what I want to do with my channel and what I want to be talking about, is how can we internally use our ego as a vehicle for transformation, in the sense that it wants to become aware. It is able to become aware. It soaks up awareness. It's not this dam between two waters, like not letting one side cross over to the other. And I believe that we have to do that collectively as well, or else we will continue to see these cultural divisions and problems, because a lot of them do seem to be associated with type. I'm seeing a huge feeler versus thinker battle happen in the US. And the funny thing is that feelers who feel that their feelings haven't been heard are so loud about their feelings right now that they're not making sense. They're not making any sense. They're not, there's a bunch of feelers who are undermining their own points constantly and being very hypocritical because of such one-sided feeling, to the point where they're so hypocritical and they're so undermining their own point that their feeling can become corrupted and their feeling can become vengeful and hateful, even when it started with a good place. And then we also have thinkers who are so wanting to be logical and only trust things that have been proven logically with science, that they are dismissing emotions, they're stomping on them, they're becoming cruel and cold in their inability to hear or witness anyone's emotion, to the point where their logic becomes absolutely nonsensical, and they do not even realize the way that their own fear is, corrupting the way that they're even looking at the numbers. So these two poles are extreme right now. And it's important for thinkers to recognize the way that their emotions are influencing the way that they look at the numbers, and realizing that your solutions need to work for real people, which means that they have emotions that they might react to. And feelers, you know, standing true in your own point, standing true in who you are. And, I don't know how to explain that one as well, because it's the one that I struggle with the most. But I hope that this video and this discussion made you think. Let me know if you had any thoughts that you wanted to share. I'm in a major transition phase, so I'm not sure how many videos to expect. But I will be back soon, more regularly, and this was great to make this video and have this discussion. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.